Museum's founding director, and I am beyond delighted to see you all here today. At the Broad right now, the very first visitors are entering our galleries to see the influential exhibition, Soul of a Nation, Art in the Age of Black Power, 1963 to 1983, and we could not be more excited and honored to have that show at the Broad. The exhibition is curated by Mark Godfrey, Senior Curator of International Art, and Zoe Whitley, Curator of International Art, both at Tate Modern. Its presentation at the Broad has been curated by Sarah Lawyer, the museum's Associate Curator and Exhibitions Manager. Just in our third year of operation, it has been an incredible journey to lead the Broad. In 2018 alone, the Broad has welcomed roughly 815,000 visitors, our highest calendar year attendance ever, and a 12% increase over the year prior. Many of our visitors are millennials. Their average age is 34, and they're diverse. It is core to our mission that we present to them thought-provoking exhibitions and programming that not only excites them, but also promotes critical thinking and compels them to ask questions. And it is with this in mind, to a large extent, that we're presenting Soul of a Nation. And to make sure we give everyone an opportunity to see this exhibition, we're extending our student and youth tours into the summer this year for the first time. And the exhibition will be free to everyone each Thursday evening during the show's run. Thank you. With Soul of a Nation, we continue to share art that explores social and political ideas, as do many works in the existing Broad collection. The exhibition highlights the vital contributions of Black artists during two revolutionary decades in American history, beginning in 1963, at the height of the Civil Rights Movement. Soul of a Nation offers a wide lens look at artists' agency as artists, and how Black artists often negotiated a complicated intersection of abstraction and figurative painting, of addressing an exclusively African-American audience or a universal audience, of carrying the mantle of social justice content or taking on less overtly political concerns. The works by more than 60 African-American artists in this show are more important today than ever, at a time when the headwinds of social and cultural discord are again with us. In the stories they share in their works, these artists demonstrate to us how art can make history and change minds. Today's rich programming has been organized by Bridget R. Cooks, Associate Professor of African American Studies and Art History at UC Irvine, and Frank B. Wilderson III, Chair of UC Irvine's African American Studies. I'd like to take a moment to express our deep gratitude to Bridget and Frank for bringing together such remarkable thinkers, artists, and others for today's symposium. We are also incredibly excited to be hosting Mark, Zoe, Bridget, and Frank, as well as the artists, scholars, curators, museum directors, poets, and filmmakers who are part of today's Art and Politics Symposium. Throughout the day, you'll witness lively panel discussions, conversations among artists, and later this afternoon, a very special poetry reading by Kamau Daoud. I would like to take a moment to thank Sotheby's, who has been our partner on this weekend's events, for their support of this symposium. I also want to thank Associate Curator once again, Sarah Lawyer, for her work on the Broad's presentation of this exhibition, which at our venue uniquely highlights the many LA artists who played important roles in the art that came out of the activist era. Just a quick note, your tickets to this symposium include access to the exhibition, so be sure to check it out. And with that, I'd like to introduce Mark and Zoe, the organizing co-curators of Soul of a Nation. You'll then hear from Bridget and Frank, who will speak to the program they developed for today and segue us into the first panel. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for coming, and thank you so much, Joanne, Sarah, Bridget, and Frank. I'm just going to say a few words about the origin of this exhibition, as I expect many people haven't yet seen it. I'll also talk about the basic structure. Like many exhibitions, this exhibition comes out of the experience of curators looking at the work of our esteemed colleagues. And for me, several years ago, I came to Los Angeles and saw Kellie Jones's incredible exhibition, Now Dig This. which revealed a side of American art in the 60s and 70s that I had no clue about as someone who had primarily studied a narrative of American art that I'd learned about through what was in the Tate collection. So this exhibition and many other exhibitions, many done by Kellie, were really part of the thinking for Soul of a Nation. And the other part of the thinking was the enterprise of building the Tate collection. And a lot of people have asked, and if we can have the next slide, why this exhibition originated in the Tate. Well, this is kind of the story that we like to tell. We have a great collection of global art and a very important collection of American art that includes, in this period, the work of artists like Eva Hesse and Richard Serra, if we can just go back one. But in recent years, we've wanted to think, after seeing shows like Now Dig This, about the artists that we didn't know about necessarily, who weren't showing their work in Europe, but whose work was incredibly important. And so we tried to build the collection, and we're very pleased to say that in the last, couple of years, we've added this incredible work by Melvin Edwards, Curtain for William and Peter, to the collection. So this now is part of our collection, but whenever we do research for collection building, we look into where the works were first shown and what was first written about them. This work was first shown in an exhibition curated by Frank Bowling called 5+1. And in that exhibition were also Jack Whitten, Alvin Loving, Daniel LaRue Johnson, and one other person I'm forgetting for the second. And when Frank Bowling wrote about this work, he was defending the work of abstract artists, but he was also thinking about the difference between their position and the work of other artists based in New York, like Benny Andrews, who's also in the show, or Faith Ringgold, who were working in a much more political way. So just the research behind this acquisition showed that there were competing visions of how to be a black artist at the moment of civil rights and at the moment of black power. And in that kernel of seeing Melvin Edwards' work at Now Dig This, then thinking about an acquisition and the debates that were going on at the time that this work was made, that kind of launched the research for Soul of a Nation. It's a show in 12 rooms. Each room is either dedicated to a group of artists working in a particular place who came together to think about questions about art together, the Spiral Group, the Kamoingi Group, the AfriCOBRA Group, or there are rooms which deal with a question, a challenge, like where should art be placed? Should it be placed in the gallery or on the streets? And as you go through the exhibition, you see such a range of competing ideas about what an artist's role could be, what type of art an artist should make. And most importantly, we wanted to show everything in the most beautiful way possible and to really do justice to the incredible power of each work. And Sarah Lawyer has done that job of installing the works in the show so fantastically that you're all in for a great treat when you see the show. I'll shut up, but Zoe's now going to give some more stories about how this came to be.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone. It's so exciting to be here. Good morning. One of the other things that matters, we can still stay on that one slide, please. Very keen to get to Brockman Gallery. Is we've had a very, very phenomenal and almost indescribable period of years leading up to this exhibition. And in researching it, being able to learn directly from artists. And the anecdotal and the artist's perspective is so crucial in how we present the work. And so with Melvin's Curtain for William and Peter, for instance, even in one same artwork, there are two different ways that we're able to look at it and talk about it, even with the artist being in the room. So if Mark and I ever emphasize the barbed wire as this kind of jagged line and the positive and negative spaces of the chain link, interlinking, then Melvin would be very quick to pull our coats and say, but it also relates to chain gangs and history of incarceration and all of those things that are true. And when we were to start at that point, then he'd always be like, I was much more interested in the broken line and the cast shadow. And both of these things are true. This is what it is. It's both and, not either or. And being able to collaborate with the artists is everything. And it has been everything to us personally and professionally. And that's a little bit of what I wanted to speak to you about this morning, is not only the rootedness of place here in Los Angeles, and we can now move to the next slide. So here's an image, for instance, of the Brockman Gallery in Leimert Park. Dale and Alonzo Davis, yeah, we can give it up for them. A Black-owned gallery, and the first to show many of the vanguard artists' works who we were able to display in this exhibition. Charles Mingus is attributed with one of my favorite quotes about the nature of creative practice. Making the simple complicated is commonplace. Making the complicated simple, awesomely simple, that's creativity. And I think Sullivanation has been all about creative collaboration. And creative collaboration is not easy. It's often really hard. But it underpins all of what Sullivanation is and what has become, not just between me and Mark, or working with exemplary collaborators like Sarah Lawyer and Joanne Heiler at the Broad, but really thinking through the generous support of people like the Ford Foundation and Darren Walker, who's not able to be here today, but very grateful for his constant support and championing of this exhibition, and Elizabeth Alexander, who's no longer at the Ford Foundation, at the Mellon Foundation. But these are all examples of the types of creative collaboration that make an exhibition like this possible. And it goes nearly without saying, as I said, that there's also the artists collaborating, not only with us and trusting us to bring this exhibition to you, but also collaborating with one another. Next slide, please. So here's an example of one of the exhibitions that took place under the auspices of the Brockman Gallery. Next slide, please. And here's another. And you can see another version of one of these types of body prints in the exhibition, admissions office. Next slide, please. And here's another. I loved these images and wanted to give people some sense of the nature of the archive and how rich the material is that we've been able to access. Next slide, please. But this one I think is crucial because I'm mentioning how difficult it is to make work. The contexts in which artists were working were not always easy, often incredibly difficult. So with something like this, you literally have this lifeline, the blood bag, this nature of a gallery in crisis needing to do what it can to stay afloat financially and otherwise being viable. Next slide, please. And we were also fortunate to speak to so many of the people, like not only Kellie, but the earlier generation of people who literally wrote this history. So people like Dr. Samela Lewis, who's based here in Los Angeles, and Ruth G. Waddy, who made these phenomenal volumes, the kind of first published volumes of a kind of contemporary art history. Next slide, please. And here's some images of Betty Saar at the Watts Towers. I just wanted to give people a sense that Los Angeles has mattered hugely in our research, in talking to people, in understanding their connection to place and other artists. Next slide, please. And this is the final one. So then we've got this image of John Arterbridge at Simon Rodia's Watts Towers. And then if you were to go to Art and Practice right now, on the site of the former Brockman Gallery, we've kind of come full circle. There's a wonderful exhibition on called Time is Running Out of Time, of time-based media works. And one of the artists included in it is Colleen Smith. And in her most recent film that is touring nationwide, she's made this wonderful piece in the high desert in Noah Purifoy's art installations. So these ways of thinking about the interconnectedness of artists and what creative collaboration means is something that will get fleshed out in lots of different ways today, and we're so glad to have you here. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm Bridget Cooks, and this is my colleague, Frank Wilderson. And we are delighted to be here. We're delighted to see all of you. We were given the honor and challenge of organizing today's event, and we've been greatly looking forward to this. So thank you for making the time to be a part of this. I also want to extend thanks to Joanne for her support of this event, to Ed Batuta, who is Director of Audience Engagement at the Broad, Sarah Lawyer, who's the Associate Curator, an exhibition manager at the Broad. And thank you also for the very strong installation of the exhibition. Thanks also to Zoe and Mark, who you just heard from, for making the exhibition possible from the ground up. We are very fortunate to have on today's program a list of heavyweights, artists, curators, a poet, a filmmaker, directors, gallerists, and scholars who make today truly an exciting event. And as Joanne said, please hold on to your ticket so that you're able to see the exhibition at any time throughout the run. And it goes through the entire summer, which is really delightful. So when you go see Soul of a Nation, I think that there's good news and bad news. The good news and bad news is that the art is absolutely fresh and still relevant. Our goal for today Our goal for today is to explore how this is true, you know. How is it that art made between 1963 and 1983 speaks to our artistic and social concerns in 2019? And so today marks an opportunity to consider where we've been, how we've survived, which is what I'm always interested in, and to consider where we'd like to be in the future.
Thank you, Bridget. I can only echo what you've just said. At the gala last night, I was really excited and pumped up for the celebratory aspects of it, but I also kept thinking about the people who struggled and survived and who didn't survive to produce the context from 1963 to 1983 that made this whole exhibition possible. And one of the phrases that came back to me from that time was a phrase that was popularized by the Panthers, which is the need to heighten the contradictions. And I think this is what you've been talking about here. We want to celebrate, but we also want to realize that our existence in this country is a contradictory existence, and we shouldn't be shy about expressing that. So I'm just going to read a short paragraph. I had a conversation with art historian named Huey Copeland, and it was published in Art Forum magazine. And at a certain point in time, we were asked by Art Forum to discuss the construction of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And at a certain point in time, we hit upon this idea, well, it's great, but it also feels like we've been presented as a spectacle without any kind of depth. It's like blaxploitation, when you were glad to see yourself in the movie, but you knew that that wasn't a movie that really expressed what you were all about. And so he asked me a question about progress and the liberal narratives of progress and how it relates to this museum in Washington that has all these contradictions within it. And so what I want to share with you some of the thoughts from that, and see perhaps later that it's pertinent for today. I said, there's an expectation that the National Museum of African American History and Culture is going to start a national conversation about race or be a major contributor to one. The other expectation is that, yes, the museum is about blacks, but really it's for everyone. This is really different from the National Museum of American Indian History and Culture, which is about Native American people and for Native American people, as well as others. A sign at that museum reads, a sign saying, "Welcome to Black America" at the entrance of our museum would be a scandal. But "Welcome to Native America" is not a mainstream scandal. You cannot be black, as Frantz Fanon reminds us, with impunity. So narratives of racial inclusion and black social progress that the National Museum of African American History and Culture deploys are symptoms of what Jared Sexton calls the anxiety of antagonism. There's always an anxiety about whether there's a place for black people in the kind of poison pill that we represent in the national psyche. Because unlike the Native American, the Black American or the slave's paradigm of subjugation is total. Its usurpation is of subjectivity that is at the core of Black subjugation, rather than the usurpation of land or labor power. For the slave, there is no surplus value to be restored to the time of labor. And no treaties between Black people and the government are in Washington waiting to be signed or ratified. Unlike the settler in the Native American political imagination, there is no place like Europe to which Blacks or slaves can send our antagonists back to. Humanity itself is the antagonist of the slave. That is a much more systemic problem, which is why I call it a poison pill. What to do with a group of people against whom the whole world is at war? Mainstream institutions like this museum, mainstream institutions of representation, no matter how liberal, are not willing to wallow in this contradiction and represent Black achievements. But it's also got to, they want to elaborate and illustrate and represent Black achievements, but it has also got to make the rest of the world feel safe when they do that. So how can we have a conversation in which we don't worry about making the rest of the world feel safe? I look forward to that tonight.
So quickly, I just want to remind everyone to silence their cell phones. And just to make one note in terms of the program. So all of our participants are extremely accomplished people. And we're just going to introduce them. Frank and I are just going to introduce everyone by their name and title. The Broad has created this lovely program that I hope everyone got on their way in. And we ask you to refer to the longer bios in the program for more detailed information about each person, just to save time. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and begin. Frank's going to introduce the first panel.
Okay, our first panel is called The Politics of Black Exhibitions. And the panelists are Thelma Golden, who is director and chief curator of the Studio Museum of Harlem, Kellie Jones, who is professor of art and archaeology and the Institute of Research in African American Studies at Columbia University, Naima Keith, who is vice president of Education and Public Programs at LACMA, and our own Bridget Cooks, who is my colleague, associate professor of African American Studies and Art History at UC Irvine. So please, let's welcome our first panel.
So, okay, can you hear me? Excellent. Okay, so welcome.
Hello.
Great to be here.
Welcome.
Always great to be in LA.
Exactly. Hello, everyone. We can see you all somewhat.
Yeah.
We know you're there.
I'm really excited to be here with all of you because you are all my mentors and people who I really look up to and have even before I had met you individually. So thank you for your time. And as we speak, there'll be a series of images showing behind us so that you can see that are all relevant to the topic that we're discussing, the politics of Black exhibitions. So I have a number of questions just to get us started and thinking about the significance of this moment and this day. All of you have accomplished so many things, and so we just want to have an opportunity to learn from you and to have some insight into to what all of this means. So given the success of exhibitions like Soul of a Nation internationally and nationally, The question that I have for us to start with is, how can the conversation about African American artists move forward from here?
Naima.
Thelma, you take it. You take the first. Seriously.
Well, I know this is going to happen. Well, first of all, let me just say, I mean, Bridget said it. Thank you for gathering us together. I think it is incredibly special to me to be on the stage with Kellie and Naima. I worked for Kellie in my career, and Naima worked with me, and all of us worked at the Studio Museum in Harlem. So there are many, many, many ways that we are all connected to each other. So to this question, what does this moment mean? I think it means many things. I think rather than think about what the moment means, I've been thinking a lot about what the moment requires.
Okay.
Right? What does this moment require of us? And it requires us to think a lot about the past and to reclaim it. Zoe and Mark just spoke a lot about the lineage of this exhibition being rooted in many histories, some of which have been written, but many that have been not. It requires us to acknowledge the work that's been done to get us to this moment, work like Kellie's work that makes it impossible for any of us to consider an art history of this moment without her contribution. It makes it important for us to understand institution, right? And what institutions mean, what they've meant, what they have been to us, and what they haven't been. Right? To just name it and understand it. And it's important to think about what all of this moment can create for a future.
Okay. Other comments on this?
I don't think anyone could follow Thelma, but
Very hard, very hard.
exactly. In terms of what this moment means, I think speaking from maybe an LA perspective, given that I'm from Los Angeles, I think this moment means that there's finally a recognition of the long art history or the critical role that artists have played here in Los Angeles. I think that there's finally, again, due to Kellie's work and this exhibition, many, many others, I think finally a multi-generational and also kind of multi-layered conversation, right? So that LA artists are considered in New York or kind of considered their role in many different places. So I think this moment is just so inspiring and so amazing for me. Like I said, as an Angelino and as someone who's been studying LA art history for such a long time, that the artists that I've long known and admired are finally being kind of talked about in a larger context, right? They're not just kind of hometown heroes, but someone like Noah Purefoy is finally being discussed in kind of a larger conversation. And that work that Kellie brought out from, the Whitney storage is finally being seen multiple times, right? Or that people are making pilgrimages to Joshua Tree, on a regular basis when they come to California. So for me, this moment has just been, really amazing to kind of think about what future art history will look like and what role the West Coast will play in that discussion.
I think I would just add, of course, it's always hard to follow Thelma and people talking about my work. We are not going to forget that Thelma is actually the longest serving director of the Studio Museum in Harlem in its history, and what she's done on that platform, besides the other wonderful people, but just, let's honor that. But I think the required part is important in her statement because as a historian, I've seen it. You study it as Bridget has studied it. You see these ebbs and flows. And so people always ask me, well, are you excited? I'm super excited. But how does it stick? And I'm also an optimist. So I think, yes, this is the moment. It's going to continue. It's not just going to be that moment in history, right? Like the 40s, like the 20s, like the 60s. I'm hopeful, but the historian in me is kind of the pessimist in some ways. It's just in my ear like that. And so, to Thelma's statement, what is required so that it isn't just a moment is the question.
That's right.
Well, I think in some way that question has already been answered to a certain degree, right? So then, Now Dig This opened in 2011, and since then we have seen so many exhibitions come out of that moment, right? So like, Senga's, exhibition traveled Purefoy had a major exhibition. This Soul of a Nation opened. So yes, I am also an optimist, but I guess I'm inspired by the fact that there have been so many shows that have already come out of even now Dig This. Since Maren Hassinger's exhibition at Spelman, so there have been so many shows that at least signal to me that this is maybe just not a blip, but I agree that it requires that we continue to kind of explore or continue to put on exhibitions.
Well, there will always be the effort towards making exhibitions, and that's what we can talk about, this lineage of art historians and curators. But I think when we talk about the historic absences, we're talking about institutions. Yeah. I often have to remember, even myself in thinking about this long history, Blackmail was in LA in 1995. Right? After opening at the Whitney in '94, Blackmail spent 3 months at the Hammer at a time when this conversation and the institutional conversation in the city around Black artists was very different. And so really, I think, when we're talking about exhibition making, we can't divorce it from institutions and institutional histories.
Well, is there something different, do you think, about this moment than the moments that we're talking about in earlier cycles, in the 30s or the 40s or the 60s? Is there something unique about this moment that maybe will make it not just be a blip, right? So it's not 1995, it's not 1994. How can we move forward from this opportunity to visit with this work and have conversations about what's happened in the past?
I think one of the things that gives me hope about not just being a moment is the focus finally on people, curators, training people, training a diverse cadre of museum workers. In the 60s, when people were fighting to get into museums, the one thing, for instance, at the Whitney that didn't get answered in the 60s was a Black curator.
That's right.
Didn't get answered till when? The 90s.
1991.
When Thelma goes to the Whitney. Took 30 years to answer that question, but now, I'd say in the last 5 years, there's been a lot of care taken to training people in a way that I've not seen before. So that gives me hope, because there are a lot of people who are being trained to do a lot of things. They're scholars, they're people trained to work in museums, they're museums that are taking the time to have internships to train a wide variety of people. So that really, I think, is something different, and it's the question that's finally answered really 50 years later, when you don't just have one Thelma Golden at the Whitney, but you're actually training a number of people, then we see different people going to different places, so it's exciting for that reason for me.
Yeah, so thinking about the behind the scenes, the back of the house and the front of the house, and trying to make a better connection between those two places to make some kind of institutional change. So, right, so it's coming from within, and then on the outside, people can see what's different on the gallery walls. I think that's also true in terms of training people academically, because all of us do a lot of mentoring. And so we're training scholars, we're training researchers. Some of them will become curators, but a lot of them will become involved in the arts in different ways, and some of them will become professors as well. So it's like multiple fronts. You have to get people involved and invested on multiple fronts. What do you think, thinking about the future, which none of us can predict, but thinking about maybe what our visions might be for the impact then of what happens next with a new generation of scholars, a new generation of museum professionals. We have all these people who are growing up who want to be Thelma Golden, who want to be Kellie Jones. What kind of work do you hope that they will make? What kind of contribution?
Well, as someone who grew up wanting to be Kellie Jones, I think, well, let me say, speaking personally, I got a chance to work with Kellie for 3 years on Now Dig This. I was hired as a graduate student to work on the project. It was my dream job in a lot of ways because I'd long admired Kellie's work. And what I learned from that experience is so many things, but really just the importance of scholarship, the importance of turning over every single rock and making sure that, it's not just about selecting the work and not just necessarily thinking about what the show is going to look like necessarily, but also staying true to what the scholarship says, right? And really kind of thinking about the impact of the exhibition. I think what also made Now Dig This so amazing is that it wasn't just about thinking about the African American artists living and working in Los Angeles, but also the connection that a lot of these artists had to many different other ethnicities, right? So Caucasian and Latin American and everything else. And so I think thinking about the complex and kind of multi-layered careers of artists, I think was also something that I learned. So I think moving forward, scholars realizing that artists are multi-dimensional people, and that it's not just about the work, but also thinking about the work in a larger context. And I think, not necessarily being able to move forward without considering scholarship when you're producing an exhibition.
Yeah, I also think that in bringing different people on, just because you have a variety of people, Latinx people, African American people, and so on, you're not going to, hopefully, even in 2019, expect them to do the Black show or the Latinx show or that, and that people are there to give you another perspective and to be open, institutions to be open to whatever that might be. But that, I think what I'm trying to say is splitting those two things. So you want institutions that reflect what this country really is, and then you want an institutional culture or a vision for the museum that shows that too. And that's not, you're going to hire, Naima to do that, or, so on. But to take those two things separately, and scholarship also.
We have taken a very particular focus, a real priority at the Studio Museum on training, right? On thinking about what it means to provide opportunity for aspiring curators to not only find their curatorial voice, but to exist in institution in ways that is dynamic, so that they can choose a path in the academy, a path in other institutions, and even think about institutions in the broadest way. And the reason that has been such an institutional priority and such a personal passion of mine is when you ask, how do we sustain this? We sustain it with a richer, more diverse museum and art community. It's simple. Right? No one person can do all the work, even though there have been people who have done a lot of work, right? Much more than perhaps they should have had to do in order to fill in these spaces, to write these histories, to create exhibitions. But what we do when we allow for the opportunity to have a rich group of people working is we create much more opportunity, not just for those individuals, but for the institutions and for our art community.
I want to ask a question that's about this phrase that, Kellie, I think you brought up, of the Black exhibition. And, in our country's history, the way that Black artists have been shown is usually as a group. And some artists have been very happy to embrace that, and others really want to be shown in a larger conversation of artists who are working with the same materials or same kind of questions that they're asking. And thinking about the future of what happens next, I wonder if any of you could say something about changing those parameters. If there is a way that we're imagining different kinds of exhibitions in the future. And, what's tricky, I think, about Soul of a Nation is, most of the artists in the exhibition are Black artists. But that's not what unites them so much as they're making work in a particular moment, right? And parameters of these 20-year periods. And I'm just thinking, as curators, what kind of thoughts do you have about other kinds of parameters? Like, so when will we see Wadsworth and J. Jarrell's work again? What kind of exhibition will that be? What are other kinds of possibilities for showing the richness and diversity of the work in the show?
Well, As the director of the Studio Museum in Harlem, we love a black exhibition. We love a black anything. You know, we are black all the time, okay? So we don't really have to call it that at the Studio Museum. That is just called an exhibition.
All right,
Yes.
all right.
Woo! Yes,
Okay.
it is.
Okay.
I like
So,
it.
with that on the table, my own trajectory, however, has been to really see that in complex ways. So, you know, when becoming the first black curator at the Whitney Museum after real protest by many people who still walk among us, right, who asked the Whitney Museum in the late 60s for many things. The top of the list was a curator, and that did not happen for all of those years. It became very clear to me in thinking about my own curatorial path, what kind of exhibition would I make? And it was very clear that on the one hand, I fully embraced the idea that a black exhibition in its most narrow form was not only the wrong thing for that moment, the 90s, but not an exhibition I could make. But at the same time, I was deeply compelled by the possibility of what it meant to think about blackness in the form of an exhibition in an institution that had this complicated history around it, and made an exhibition called Black Male. I saw Greg Tate last night. I always have to give credit to that title. Greg Tate named that exhibition Black Male, and made that exhibition about blackness, but not only of black artists, right? So, you know, I spent a lot of my curatorial career trying to explore this idea of how to sort of deeply engage with black artists, black ideas, black thought, but to do it in ways that were complex. Fast forward to 2000, I become the chief curator of the Studio Museum, working for Lowry Stokes Sims, who is the director at that time. And we thought hard about this issue. And I think, you know, as I'm saying this, I realize also another name I have to call is that in this moment is that when we rewrote our mission in 2004 at the Studio Museum to be a museum of artists of African descent locally, nationally, and internationally, that construction, that way of talking about blackness was given to me as a gift by my friend, my colleague, my very deep departed brother, Okwe Nwezor. Okwe came to that for me. He said that this is the way to open up this space of complexity and to acknowledge it within not just this context of African American, but a whole sort of global black presence. And so in that regard, I think that what we want, what we hope for, is the possibility to exist within this spectrum, right? That there is something that can be a black exhibition and that can be generative and important and significant, and then there's something else, right, that is not that we would want to move away from. But I think, again, what we're talking about here is curatorial vision and curatorial voice. And when that is empowered, that's when we get to this kind of complexity.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the reasons why people come from all over the world to the Studio Museum is because of the diversity of the exhibitions. Even though all of the artists are black, you know, for some people that's a limitation, and for others, you know, the deeper we look, the more that we see.
It's the whole world. I remember when I left the Whitney and went to the Studio Museum, many people said to me, "Oh my goodness, isn't this going to be so hard for you, going from the Whitney Museum to the Studio Museum, from this, you know, wide realm to this more culturally specific?" And I always thought that was a very interesting way to frame it, because truthfully, the Studio Museum in our outlook was truly international, right? It was the whole world. And that sense of possibility to me was very great. But I do think that idea of a deep blackness, you know, early in my time, we used to get, a journalist would get mad at us at the Studio Museum because we did not put black in our press releases. Our attitude was, if it came from us, right? We didn't have to say, this is a black exhibition of black artists in Black History Month about black, you know. We could say, this is an exhibition of art and it's February, right? I mean, you know, it's just our reality. Like, you just take, you know, just take the black out of the sentence and say, this is our world.
Yes.
But what's powerful about that is that worldview has created the opportunity. Once that's not there, then yes, you get all of this possibility and can think of the art and the artists in really powerful ways. And that's the gift, I think, of the Studio Museum. That was a vision of our founders. You know, it's so proud to see in Soul of a Nation and so thrilled that Mark and Zoe included it, but our Tom Lloyd work, which was a work that comes out of the first exhibition at the Studio Museum. So to imagine that this is an institution that founded itself within this realm of the widest idea of what Black practice could be.
I also want to add that, you know, when people see that word, Black, it does things to people. They kind of lose their minds. But if you would, if you would say, we're showing German artists from 1970 to 1990, nobody would bat an eye.
Exactly.
So it's something about the term and what it means to people. Maybe it's its global reach also.
Right.
And exactly as you said, you know, you go from the Whitney, and everybody thinks it's so wide, but that's a museum of American art, by the way.
That's right.
Which is actually a museum of U.S. art,
Exactly.
not America's, right? So it's even further.
Right.
So I think it's just people's reaction to that term that really is still strange to me. But certainly, as you said, Thelma, it's a global thing.
Right.
Hey.
Q&A.
Are we out of time?
Yes.
Oh my God!
I was gonna answer, and
see,
he
Bridget,
keeps
you
it. He
didn't
literally,
even
he's
get-
like,
okay.
please open up the
Q&A.
Q&A.
Like totally out of time, really? Okay.
Yeah, that's all.
We
I was
were
like,
just chit chatting.
Exactly.
You know,
see him.
when we girls just
Yes,
chit chat up on the
exactly.
stage, you know.
Well, I think.
Yeah, I was like, I could see him, and he's like,
I know.
Sorry,
right.
I'm sorry, I didn't see him.
no, he can't, so it's fine.
Okay, well, we have until 11:50. It's 11 o'clock. I suppose we have to open up for questions. I have a bunch of other things.
Why
I
don't you
want to
open it,
talk
and we
about.
can go back to your
Okay,
questions,
thank
Bridget.
you.
Yeah.
So I believe that we have a mic on a stand, if that's correct, over here on this side. If you have questions, is that correct that there's a microphone over here?
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we'll share the.
Here's our mic. Okay.
We're sharing. We're friends.
Yeah.
It's good. It's all good.
Or we could hold it and then pass it.
So if you have a question, just please come to the microphone.
Oh no. Wait. Is that the time for questions?
Yeah.
Is that how many?
Okay. All right.
So,
So we're going to wrap it up at 11:50 after questions. Got it. That seemed. It seemed like that was too short.
Yeah, he's literally like holding up a zero.
Okay, keep asking
Okay.
us questions, Bridget. Come on. Okay.
Thank you, because that just seemed too short.
Thank you, Alex.
Alexander.
Okay, keep
Yeah.
going, Bridget. Yeah.
So what I wanted to say in response to what you have offered us is it seems that part of what I'm hearing is that the exhibitions that we're thinking about for the future and the exhibitions that you have already been working on is really about, it's not just about art in a sort of categorical way. It's about redefining Blackness itself. That there's a way in which sort of dropping anchor into or spending more time looking at the diversity of Blackness opens up and breaks free of the barriers that people think about when they think about Black art in a very limiting way. The reality of what you've been doing at the Studio Museum, the reality of what Kellie's been doing in museums all over the country, is that when we really look at what Black artists are doing, right, and maybe for some people that means taking the word Black out of it in some way in this process to really focus on the ideas and focus on the artwork, really redefines for many people that Blackness is everything, right? I mean, one of the great things I think about Soul of a Nation is that we have abstraction and figuration. We have political art that some people expect to see when they say, okay, this is a show about Black people in the 60s. I'm going to see fists and I'm going to see afros, right? Okay. there's a lot more going on in that show. And even in those works with fists and afros, there's more than style, right? It's about substance, and it's about history, and it's about vision and dreams and revolt and all of those things. So it just seems just to try to process and mirror back what I'm hearing from you is that part of the project here is to change the way that people perceive Blackness in itself.
Yes, period. But I think also, maybe the project, I'd frame it a little differently. Maybe the project is really about self-definition and intellectual autonomy. Maybe the project is about the ability to embrace complexity. Maybe the project is to be artist-centered and create the space for what artist centrality means. And maybe it is, one of the things I think so interesting when we start talking about these ideas of cultural specificity is that they sort of privilege a certain kind of value, right? They privilege the idea that the value that we are ascribing is one, and I don't mean financial value, I mean this intellectual or cultural value, is one that is validated through a mainstream. Right? And one of the gifts of being director of the Studio Museum and inheriting this incredible history is what it means to understand self-definition and when that value is self-created, right? Even when it's not recognized by others, right? But there's this internal self-creation that sort of positions importance, significance, worth, wealth, all of those things, currency. And I think that what perhaps the project is and what exhibitions like Soul of a Nation do in writing complex narratives is they allow us to get out of this sort of these tropes of marginalization that make us need to be in a defensive posture when we talk about it. Like I say, I love a Black exhibition. Give me a Black exhibition every single day, right? Why I'm the director of the Studio Museum, right? Because that's exactly what I want. But when I say that, I am not in any way sort of troubled by what some of the problematic of that is. I am only inspired about what the possibility of that is.
But I guess my question would be, sorry, I'm just going to jump in and ask questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
As being the former chief curator at the California African American Museum, where I was, brought up in the same way, where you're opening up possibilities, you're opening up the conversation, you're really kind of thinking about how African American art exhibitions can be different and thought about in different ways. How do you handle questions from the audience that may not be ready for or want for an exhibition to be thought of in that way? Does that make sense? So, for example, when I started changing the exhibition program at CAM to much more of a kind of contemporary focus, we did get a lot of questions about the types of African-American artists that we were showing, or, okay, well, when we were gonna focus on maybe this artist or this type of work, are we moving away from that? Are we abandoning, the artists that work in a particular way? How have you answered those questions, being at the helm of the Studio Museum for so long? Answer the questions that when people feel as if certain types of African-American art are being left behind.
Well, we answer them with a deep respect for what it means to sort of think broadly and understand that at different moments in institutional life, institutions land in certain places, right? Institutions are only made up of the people who are in them. So that we look at any institutional history, it's written, those narratives are written very specifically. But I also think it means that sometimes what you're responding to, that question also comes because there are so few spaces who do what we do. Right? So the challenge is, in the limited square footage we have, there is so much desire for us to do everything that is not always possible. And that desire comes from the absence of this work in other places.
Right.
So we are called on to sort of do the work that we are going to do and do all the work that others aren't going to do, or only do it in a seasonal kind of way, right? My brother Glenn Ligon always says, that sometimes in other places, African American art is the special, if we were talking about a restaurant, but for us, it's always on the menu, right? Glenn always reminds me of that. So I think that it is in thinking about our institutional structures, thinking about culturally specific institution structures, community-based institution structures, we also have to think about how we grow our capacity to be able to do the work that we know needs to be done all the time, and to be able to allow our audiences to understand what that means.
I would jump in with it too to say, as Naima said about me, start with the scholarship, which I love, and as my partner always tells me, oh, there she goes talking to those dead black people again, you better watch out. Something's gonna happen. I talk to live ones too. Or dead black artists as opposed to live ones. But I think what happens when you follow the scholarship, you know, whether the person is from the early 20th century or from now, is that you learn things that are not the regular things. You turn that stone over and you find other things that you hadn't anticipated. Bridget's book about the exhibition histories of African American artists is amazing too. It's one of my favorite books right now because it does that, because it shows, you know, when people are showing at the Whitney in the 60s and they're getting this little, you know, corner lobby
gallery,
just larger than bathroom space kind of, they're mad, but they're mad because they've been mad for 50 years because that's been going on.
Right.
Right? So those type of things change what you're thinking about today when you realize, wow, that went on. Or you realize that, you know, there are African American artists working in, you know, when I first remember showing Edmonia Lewis's work from the 19th century to a class, and people say, but when are we really going to get to the black art?
Right.
Because she's an African American and Native American artist who's working in the 19th century, and people work with white marble. And so she did thematically works about African American life, but they look white. But, you know, so you have to take all of those things into account when you think about, you know, what we think we know about a black show or about African American artists, because there are a lot more stories out there.
So Kellie, can I just follow up and ask you to say even more about, because you're a curator and a professor and a scholar, can you say more about the relationship between scholarship, this research that all three of you do, and how that could impact future exhibitions, but also I think part of what Naima is talking about is different communities of people being able to understand different forms of representation. What's the relationship between scholarship and curating?
Well, let me just start by saying there are different places that scholarship is done. It's done in the academy, but it's done in the museum. It's done at the Studio Museum. It's done at CAM. It's done in different places. My goal in becoming a professor was to actually train as many people as I could so I could retire. That was my goal. Like, all right, I can't just be the one doing this, me and Thelma and Lowry out here. You know, there got to be a few more people out here. And I want to diversify art history. I love all types of art history. But I think it's important, and again, this goes back to me as a history person, you know, there was a time when somebody who looked like me couldn't teach white people, right? That's not allowed. You can't be a black supervisor of white people. What? Who does that? So, you know, to say that now, to stand up and teach everybody about this history is important as well. So I'm really interested in the training, whether you want to be in the academy, whether you go into museums. Another, you know, you can think of Thomas Lax, who's worked with all of us, who does, you know, just did the work is never done at MoMA, Judson Dance Theater. And, you know, that research on performance history that was done there. So there's a lot of places where scholarship takes place.
Thank you. Thelma, we've been looking at a whole number of images cycling behind us, and I had a set of pictures in here that speak to the new design of the expansion and the new building of the Studio Museum in Harlem. I know a lot of people, including myself, want to know more about that, so I'm hoping you can say something about that project.
Well, yes, it is incredibly exciting to be here now at this moment that the Studio Museum is celebrating our 50th anniversary, right? So, and what that means in thinking about institutional history is this particular institution, but the possibility of what that has involved. And so at this very moment that we're celebrating our 50th anniversary, we are also at the very beginning stages of construction on our new building that has been designed by David Adjaye that will rise in the site of our current building at 144 West 125th Street. So we're actually in demolition now. So I know many of you have been to the Studio Museum. All those spaces that you have been in, quite literally, now are coming down, and the construction team are taking it down floor by floor, wall by wall, and we'll begin construction in about 6 or 8 months on a building that will open and will be, for the Studio Museum, our first purpose-built building. Now that's important, and I love that we have this incredibly beautiful, sensitive, intuitive, rigorous design by David Adjaye, but I'm cautious because I think of all the work the Studio Museum has done in spaces that were not built to be museums, and it was important, significant, historic work, right? That did not need, the temple of a museum to make it happen. But that being said, it is amazing to think about our future in this space that quite literally is thinking about the ways in which the museum has existed at core as an institution devoted to the presentation of art by artists of African descent, but also an institution devoted to artists through our studio program, engaged deeply in education through our public programs, community programs, K through 12 education programs, and this space being created to house all of those things in ways that's beautiful and inspiring. So it's an incredibly exciting project that is being beautifully sort of thought about through our immediate community of Harlem, but through the entire art world. We were incredibly grateful to contributions by artists that allowed us through an auction to raise $20 million. This is a $175 million project that we are raising the money for as we speak, and a deep investment, again, and thinking about, I always say, Studio Museum has always had an incredible amount of cultural currency. And in thinking about what that has meant to now manifest into this building is incredible and important and really. Now the sad part is we are closed in this moment, and so that for me is the one thing that is incredibly sad about this building project, that we had to close down. But it's meant that we've been able to do work all over the country, so including an exhibition right now that's up of our collection in San Francisco at MOAD called Black Refractions, which has an incredible essay in it about the history of the museum by Kellie, and is going to travel to 5 other venues. So while we're closed, we're still in the world, still doing the work that we do, but look forward to this building opening.
And when will we be able to go in?
You notice I didn't say that, right?
It's like, yeah.
In the future.
In the future.
In the future. In the future.
Afrofuturism.
That's right, in the future. In the future.
Okay, I have one more question, and then I think we'll open it up. How are we doing on time? About 2 thumbs up, okay. So I want to bring it back to the local with you, Naima, since you are, along with me, the LA representation on the stage. I wanted you to say something about this moment right now in Los Angeles. What does it mean to have the Charles White retrospective at LACMA up right now, the Plumb Line show up at CAM right now, and of course Sullivan Nation. This is a particular moment for the Black visual arts in LA, and I just wanted to hear from you of what this really means in your estimation.
Like you mentioned, it's an incredible moment. I mean, just of course want to shout out my future institution, LACMA. Their Life Model is also an exhibition that Ian White curated. That's at the Charles White Elementary School. A couple of other exhibitions, actually Zoe mentioned the LA Film Rebellion
Yes.
film show that's at Art and Practice. John Riddle is actually having an exhibition coming up that's called The Riddle Effect. That's coming up at the Craft and Folk Art Museum. And of course, what's happening at CAM with both Plum Line, as well as Adia Millet's exhibition, who was in freestyle a number of years ago, as well as a number of other shows open at CAM right now. But yeah, this is an incredible moment, I think, right now for Los Angeles. It's a celebration, again, of what contributions that LA has made to this larger conversation or this larger art history. But to kind of see all these shows at once and have visitors coming in from all over the country to not only see just Soul of a Nation, but the opening at CAM on Wednesday was packed. There were 1,700 people there, all enjoying the exhibitions on view. So I'm incredibly proud to see so many people enjoying not just exhibitions, but just the community, the art community, I think is just so inspiring. And also, to have, Betty Saar's exhibition up at, Robert's Project. I mean, there's so many shows open right now. Again, I think this is a testament to the amount of work that's happening, but also both in terms of historical and the contemporary exhibitions. So for me, as an Angela, and I do not want to not shout out Suzanne Jackson, who is here, has a fantastic show open for the next couple days. So if you can get a chance to see her exhibition, I would definitely recommend doing so. But I think this moment just shows that there is not only historical precedence, but also artists that are still living and working today. I think Suzanne Jackson's show is a testament to the fact that a lot of these artists are still making phenomenal work, and that history is being created right now. So it's a great moment in LA history.
Great, thank you. Any other final comments before we open it up to questions? We do, okay.
We're not used
Well,
to having so
I would
much
say
chat.
that also this moment really speaks to a deep amount of commitment on the part of the institutions in LA.
Yeah.
And I think that has to be acknowledged and really celebrated. And full disclosure, I have to say, I am a board member at the LA County Museum of Art, and so feel distinctly my understanding of this city and watching how this moment has come to be and the level of cooperation, collaboration that is happening between the not-for-profit art spaces, museums, and exhibition spaces, but also the way in which the entire art community has sort of rallied around this moment to not only celebrate their individual exhibitions, but really the moment that allows audiences in the city or coming to the city to have an unprecedented experience with these exhibitions and these artists. And I think that is commendable, and I think it should be seen as a real civic victory as well.
I completely agree. I mean, when LACMA decided to take the Charles White exhibition, they reached out to us immediately, and to CAM immediately, and said, we're taking this exhibition, and we want to make this a citywide celebration of Charles White's legacy. And so, how are we going to do that? And really kind of thinking, they knew they were going to do a show at the Charles White Elementary School, but wanting CAM to be involved from the very beginning at the ground level, to think about how Charles's legacy could be seen beyond the exhibition. And so to kind of speak to this idea of institutions really stepping up and saying, we want to put up exhibitions right now that are celebrating this diverse history of Los Angeles, I think is a real testament to the fact that we all work together, that there's a lot of conversation. I mean, when Joanne was thinking about taking Soul of Nation, she also reached out to say, look, we're doing this exhibition, we want to expand the exhibition, would CAM be open to lending more work to the exhibition? It was an immediate yes. CAM, we're proud to say that CAM is the largest institutional lender to Soul of a Nation, and that was really important, I think, for the museum. So CAM is a total of 7 pieces included in an exhibition, work by Betty Saar and Daniel LaRue Johnson and others. But it was very important, I think, for CAM to be such a large institutional lender because I think it pointed to the long history the commitment that CAM has had to these artists for such a long time. So for me, being able to see admissions off, David Hammonds' work or a number of other artists' work included in the exhibition just means, or just reminds people that there have been institutions that have been supporting these artists for a very long time.
There's another exhibition I wanted to mention called Black is Beautiful, photography by Kwame Brathwaite. That's opening in a couple of weeks at the Skirball Center. And this is a new kind of exhibition for them. Traditionally, they have been focused on Jewish culture, and they are branching out to try to think about, I think the words that they're using is the kind of dignity and humanity of all peoples. Right. So that's another moment, another kind of breaking through a presence and recognition of Blackness in a place that hasn't been recognized in the exact same way before.
Let me ask a question. I mean, we've talked about, this moment, how is it different? I think we need to delve in a little bit more. I mean, we're talking about, let's just center LA for a minute, all these great things that we're talking about, exhibitions. Why now? What do you all think is precipitating that? Why now? What can it be? It's not February.
Right, yeah.
It's March.
Well,
It is March, it's Women's History Month.
And I think it's beyond that. So
Well, what do you think?
no, for real. Is it a time in history? Is it the Black Lives Matter movement? Is it, the political climate? Is it just that there are more people out there who have been, delving into scholarship and spreading the word, and more people are out there spreading that word, and there are some great, maybe it's the contemporary artist driving the history, somebody like a Mark Bradford here, for instance, people who are so visible, Kerry James Marshall, so on. I mean, is it political? Is it social? Is it art historical? Is it all of the above? Is it a confluence?
I think it's all of the above, Kelly, but I also think that it is the cumulative effect of a lot of work that has happened that sort of allows this moment to be so rich, right? I think we're seeing the fruits of a lot of long labor. And I also think that we are seeing this happen at a time when we're seeing our larger contemporary art world shifting in interesting ways. I think it is not lost on me that at the moment, particularly in the US, we began to see more openness to thinking about Black artists in broad ways, was at the very same time the contemporary art world was becoming incredibly global, right? So that these sort of shifts around place, geography, aesthetics, that the kind of shifting plates have opened up a lot of space. But I also think in many cases, it also has to do about how institutions have begun to think about themselves and understand and take responsibility for the narratives that they are writing in their collections. And I think that as collections began to open up, it then offered the opportunity to imagine exhibition programs needed to reflect, respond to, or sometimes push open those sort of collections. So I think there are many different factors, and all of them I think are important to sort of think about what this moment is and what this moment, how it's become this.
I totally agree. I think all of the above, and I also think it's audiences, right? Demanding that they see a different type of art history, right? That they want to see more diversity on the walls, that they want to see themselves reflected, but that also for the types of exhibitions to be diverse, and that they're holding, somewhere like the Getty or MoMA or the Met accountable for showing a type of art history that is true, right? That they know that these artists are out there. They're looking around and they're, hearing about, whether or not it's like Jay-Z and Beyonce filming a video at the Louvre, or, a popular culture kind of catching up to what we've known for a long time. But I think audiences really kind of demanding that institutions have a more diverse exhibition program. And I think, institutions responding to that. So I think all of the above, as well as, audience participation.
I wanted to say something. I'm going to ask you, Kelly, to also comment on this, because you mentioned the Getty, and we're talking about what's happening in this moment now that's different from other moments. So last year, officially, it was announced the African American Art History Initiative was established at the Getty, and Kelly is the senior consultant on that project, and I'm part of the team. And we've been talking about what does the field need. And I'm wondering, Kelly, if you would say something about what we're doing with the Getty, how the Getty is helping to think about the future at this moment for Black artists.
Absolutely, and it's part of this whole kind of general push that we've been mentioning. And one of the reasons I decided to become part of it is because it's about archival collections and acquiring those collections. It's about fellowships for people from undergrad to senior scholars to work on these archives or to work on topics about African American artists. It's about partnerships with historically Black colleges and others. It's also about partnerships with places like the Schomburg and dealing with digitization so that these images and collections can be accessed and create new scholarship. So it's a very exciting moment, and it's great that the Getty has signed up to do this, has put resources behind it, recently just hired the curator, associate curator for African American collections, which is Laron P. Brooks, if he's
who might
here.
be here.
He might be here, even if he's not, we're gonna celebrate him, who will be starting this year. So he's in the back. Okay, we got you. So that's very exciting.
Okay.
So there he is
There,
standing up.
yeah.
So everybody who's been asking me about archives, he's right back there.
Yeah.
But I think it's and also it's exemplary of what institutions need to be doing in terms of this, because African American art history is American art history.
Right.
And as we know, when we delve into the archive, you see who people are with, who's supporting them, who's giving them shows. We can put LACMA in that, from a while ago under the current administration as well. So I think it's certainly the right thing to do, but it's a very exciting moment to be doing things like that, and it adds to all these other things, because there also are collaborations. It's not just on the Hill doing its thing, right? There's that, because there are great resources there, but there's also the idea of reaching out to other places that are doing this work, in different ways, that I think is probably among the most exciting.
And one other thing, just to add to what Kellie's talking about at the Getty, is that part of the initiative is a series of oral histories, right now starting with African American artists, so that we're able to have so many things recorded and to become part of the archives, people's life stories and their contributions for future scholarship and exhibitions.
Great. Thank you. Questions?
Okay, I think now we're ready for questions from the audience. So we have a microphone. I see it. There's a microphone over here on the far right. If you have questions, just come on to the microphone.
Or if someone needs it brought to them, you can raise your hand if you would like that.
Yeah, there's someone over here.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I probably don't need it then.
Okay.
So this question is for the panel, and anybody can speak on it, right? So I think, based on what I've observed internationally, I've seen Soul of a Nation in Liverpool and in London in 17, and I've been looking at art globally. As a Jamaican who looks at art globally, and we're talking about global on the platform at the moment, how do we bring other institutions to the table that speak to this fire that's happening in America? For example, Senegal, where the museum has just opened for Black civilization. There's not enough that is spoken about here about it, but there is a need and a conversation to bring back work that was taken from the continent to Africa and make those work available to Africa. So what conversation are we having?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's an incredibly, I'm sorry, I can't see you, incredibly important point. And I think when we start talking about this issue of institution building, a lot of it is about the physical, but really it's also about creating really strong bonds that allow us to have these cross-continental institutional relationships that allows us to be in conversation, to be in real communion with institutions and individuals on the continent. It's, again, another thing, I can speak all day about the many things that Okwe and Wazer gave me, and that was one, the idea that that is the trajectory, that this thinking about the US and Europe as the primary conversation is not it, right? The conversation for us as Black institutions would be conversations on the continent. So it is one of the many things that I look forward to when thinking about our future is the ability to actualize that, but also to have our institutional model be one that can show a way that we can begin to think about the continent in really interesting ways and have real equitable relationships of intellectual exchange.
Just to follow up on that in terms of Kehinde Wiley's new project that he has opened, Black Rock. So I think that is another, it's another model, another way to have connection, to be involved with institutions on the continent, and we look forward to what that will bring. We're very excited about his contribution, and really somebody who is so visible all over the globe, really taking those resources and making that next push to do the residency there in Senegal. And I think artists are, Mark Bradford and others buying Nina Simone's home. I think there's ways that we also want to give artists credit for people who have been very successful in a new way than the artists of the past, and then really putting some of their energies back into making different kind of connections and opportunities for others as well.
Yeah, it was, and I know exactly what you are saying. So the answer is, that is the intention. So I will, frame your question a different way. What we fear in moments of this, incredible, amazing engagement with cultural specificity in the mainstream is the way in which sometimes, and we have historic precedents, where this has been to the detriment of culturally specific institutions. And the resources for this work then go other places and not the communities, institutions, people, places that have sustained this work for a long time. I think when people ask what's different now, it is a different idea about value and currency, right? So that there is a model that does create the opportunity for resources for culturally specific institutions that looks at not just the sort of episodic resources, but looks at new models of sustainability that create a strength in our institutions. And the understanding of why this is necessary. A lot of people, they don't say it to me anymore, and maybe it's because I never had a good politically correct answer to it, but for many years, in my 19 years at the Studio Museum, people would say to me, well, look, and they'd take any moment where we've had this attention to Black artists elsewhere, and they'd say, why do we still need the Studio Museum? Look, it's happening elsewhere. Right? And we know the answer to that, right? And it's not a question that I even feel like I need to, answer in a certain way, because what we want to do, as I say, get out of these sort of tropes of marginalization that sort of looks at this as an either or as some progression from one place to another, of some valuing, of validation. So the answer to your question is, that is what I want everyone to understand, right? When we celebrate in these moments, what we should also be thinking about is how we take the energy of these moments and strengthen our institutions, our community-based organizations, our communities of artists, right, and art practitioners in those communities to allow for them to continue to work and be strong and to be able to see a way that we understand the future of these institutions. You know, one of the saddest things about this moment, we're always talking about these Black institutions that don't exist anymore, right? I want to stop that. Right? Stop having it be that we see that the life cycle, you know, of any culturally specific institution is based purely on money. It should not be, because the contributions that these institutions made was so incredibly important and needs to be supported, right, with real root foundation work. You know, it's why, you know, I am invested in this idea of institution building. You know, Bridget, you mentioned, you know, being scholars. Well, you know, when I worked for Kellie, it was very compelling, based on her example, to think about being a scholar. But I really felt like there was something for me to do around this idea of creating institutional models, both here and having the opportunity to create models that could exist in other places as well, that allow us to have institutions that are whole and strong and live a long life. Mm-hmm.
The community is not easily accessible. Right. The broad community is not easily accessible. So access, meaning are there shared archival
Yes.
Access built into the process for the institutions that are in partnership?
Absolutely, and that's what digitization is
Right.
about. That's what training is about.
Right.
Also, on a broader level, to be able to think about sustainability by having cadres of people who go work in different modes, like Thelma said. Not everybody's going to be a college professor. Some people are going to run institutions. Like I said, this is why I went into teaching, because that's the whole point.
Yeah.
But certainly digitization, because frankly, that's the way people access most stuff now, is a key player in all this.
Yeah, and I think in specific with the Getty, I think the partnerships with institutions like the Studio Museum, the Schomburg, California African American are to answer that very question, to also have some physical presence or a way to talk about what this project is and make it known and accessible to many different audiences.
Was there someone at the mic?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to use this thing. Where do I press?
Oh, here in the front. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
oh,
we
yes.
can.
Okay. I'd like to say to you wonderful sisters on the stage that my name is Dana Chandler, and I have exhibited at the Studio Museum back, are you ready for this? Ed Spriggs brought that's 50 years, brought a show of, I would love to stand, but I can't, brought a show from Boston of mine 50 years ago, and we used to sit in the office and just talk about the whole world. I have lived my entire life around Black genius, you know, that I have not seen until now. Thank you, sisters, so much. I have not seen until now get the recognition that it is due. And I was also in the show Tradition and Conflict.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, to walk into the museum and see my piece right up front and think about all the struggles that African American artists in general have had in this place we call America, which is not the land of the free at all, you know, because the folks who run this crap have been really cruel to us throughout that whole time. And to now, at this age, to be able to turn and say to my brother, Nelson Stevens, who's sitting right behind me, who is a genius, and to be able to talk to Betty Saar, who I had a crush on back in the late 60s, you know, in a place that is appropriate for our art, finally. You know, I'm sorry I get very emotional about this, because the pain that we've had to suffer so that we could stay in existence and look up on the stage and see you beautiful, brilliant young women tell us the shit we need to hear. So all I can say is thank you so very much.
You're welcome. Yes, go ahead.
So do you think, when you think about like the Smithsonian and NAM in 2003 and to where we are in 2017 with the National Museum drawing the masses, is that an impetus or is that a reflection culturally that we're hungry for it? In LA, we're always going to be hungry for it. We're just more culturally aware. But the rest of the world, do you think that national stage and the sold out crowds has influenced your ability to do this and the scrollball and everybody else?
You want to take that, Bridget? Just because of
Sure.
exhibitions, you know. I mean, this is your. Oh yeah, repeat the question.
So I think the question is about, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's about whether what we call. Okay, so part of it is a why now question. Specifically, has the National Museum of African American History and Culture influenced the world and influenced the ability to have exhibitions like Soul of a Nation Now? Is that right? Well, I will say yes, the popularity of that museum certainly gets people thinking about what's going on over there. Is that something that we can have, in our own institutions and in our own cities and other places? I think part of it, I think it's mixed. The attention is, I think, genuine in terms of wanting to learn about history and learning about ourselves and other people if you're not an African American person. It's also about the market. I think money is the bottom line in so many different aspects of the art world. So some of it it's about cultural, knowledge and understanding, but seeing the lines of people and the sold out every day ticketing at that museum, I think gets people thinking about how can they make that happen where they are. So, I'm excited that this was sold out. I'm excited always to have these kinds of conversations with you and with, everyone on the stage. What I hope for is that it's not just cosmetic, because we want to change people's minds. And that's, with any movement, I don't know if this is a movement that we're in. I think we're in a moment. I don't think we're in a movement right now, but.
I'm in a movement.
Are you in a movement? All right.
I am.
Yes, she is.
I hope.
Always.
Movement.
I hope that as a result of this movement, that we really see systematic change. I think, like I said, we're all mentors and educators, and we work with students, and I have a bunch of students in the audience right now, and I see you, and I'm so happy. A lot of that happens one-on-one, and we are grateful for that, because I think that's where it starts, and we're hoping that, we are able to send our students out and get them talking the talk and walking the walk and doing that understanding to really help us get on the road to larger systematic changes.
But I would like to add that this is historical. I mean, as Bridget knows, from her book I learned, and research, this happens all the time. This happens in the 30s. Black person has a show at a gallery, 2,500 people come. I did a show at the Brooklyn Museum in 2005. 40,000 people came to the last weekend. I did a show here, or the same show came here, lines around the block. Now dig this, lines around the block. I'm not surprised anymore. And guess what? It's not just Black people. People want to know this history, and that's been going on for 100 years. So when somebody said, wow, that National Museum of African American History and Culture has been sold out for 3 years. Really? Yeah, of course it has. Yeah, and I'm not surprised because I've read it in the history books. I've read it in little, asides in the New York Amsterdam News or the LA Sentinel. It's not a surprise, and it's not different in some ways. And I think for us to always be surprised, we got to start owning it and say, yeah, that's right. We're here. We're beautiful. And this is what this country is, too. And everybody wants to know that.
Oh, so I kind of wanted to say, to continue that, I wanted to ask a question more so on like a human, like personal level. So to continue his thank you, the same way I've met you guys before individually, as to say thank you for the legacies put out and the education put out. I know most of you guys, all 4 of you, through works, through books. Can you answer a very simple question on how do we, the catchers of the information, move forward? Do you have any advice on how we navigate in 2019, moving Soul of a Nation to 3019, and what can we do to talk about, you know, replacing the seats that we are able to sit in? Like, you know, when we think about Soul of a Nation and some of these shows, as you said, there's a continuum of this happens, but how can we talk about the day-to-day movement of making sure the right kids who need to know, the right people who need to know are getting this information? It may be a very simple question, but I just wanted to be spoke out in the room, so.
Hi, AJ. Saying hello because he works at the California African American Museum, so I just want to shout out a CAM staff member. So the question essentially being like, how do we make sure that the information is
You know, I think when we think about museums and curation and art spaces, stuff like that, it comes to a certain level of elitism or education or access. And I think when we think about what the point of shows like this are, it's a culmination of a lot of people's hard work, but how do we take the day-to-day, which isn't always going to be so glorious, how do you speak to, like, sometimes when it feels like exhausting energy of waiting another 30 years to see another moment like this. Like, some people are being introduced to this just now and they don't know, they have no context of what the hall has been.
But that's the work, AJ. I mean, that's the work you do, that's the work we do, and that's why we have to do the work, right? It's why we go to work. It's why we make our institutions open and accessible. It's why we continue to create the kind of structures that create accessibility in the widest way, but not just accessibility, real welcome, right? That we welcome people into our institutions to have these experiences, to allow them to understand them as important to them that they are. I mean, when I think of what we do, I mean, we all have complex missions, but really, you know, when we think about it, we really want to educate, obviously, we want to inspire, you know, we want to empower. And so I think by doing the work, if we can do those things, we aren't talking about another 30 years. We are talking about audiences that do this work with us, right? That really make our institutions whole, because that's really what it's for. Certainly, it's for the art history, you know, it's for the scholarship, but really, it's also about audience and the community that we create and what we give our communities by presenting these exhibitions, no matter where they are.
So just to piggy, and I know we're running out of time actually.
Now we are over time. So
Yeah.
Okay,
have,
let's do it.
have the last
No,
word,
no,
Naima.
that's
Really,
not pressure.
really.
No, what? Okay, I think she just.
It's okay, we can end.
I was going to say, but Bridget, really, you should do it. Yes. Well, I mean, it's your symposium.
We're out of time. So I will, Naima.
I really just want to say thank you
Okay,
to
good.
Bridget for organizing this entire day. Thank you
Yes.
to Kellie and to Thelma and to the team at the Broad for allowing us to have this conversation today, because I think they're much needed conversations.
There's more
And,
to say.
yes,
I'm known for
definitely.
saying this as a professor.
Stay
There's
tuned.
more to say.
Yes.
And I hope that we all continue the conversation. This is not resolved, you know? This is just an opportunity for us to sort of articulate things that I hope many of you are already thinking, and we really do want the conversation to continue, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So it is 11:52. We have another panel that's going to start in 3 minutes. I guess we can take just a minute or two to stretch, perhaps, and then we're going to get started again. Okay, we're going to get ready to get started again. We have one more panel, and then we're going to have a break for lunch at 12:40. Okay, we are ready for our next panel. If you have your seat, I'll go ahead and introduce them and we'll get started. So our next panel focuses on the AfriCOBRA artists. We have 3 artists from the exhibition. I'm going to introduce them, and again, you have their longer bios in your program. We have Jarrell, Gerald, Wadsworth Gerald, and Gerald Williams. All of these artists are in the Soul of a Nation exhibition. We can clap for them now. They will be in conversation with Vida L. Brown, who's visual arts curator at the California African American Museum. Yeah, come on. Any of the far three.
Well, welcome. Before we get started, let me first say it is such an honor to be in the presence of such greatness that sits beside me. I had the pleasure of seeing their work last night, and it just took me back. I got my start at the Brockman Gallery, and I knew what it was like for artists to get their start into galleries and to have a gallery such as that. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we even begin to start about talking about their artwork, let's first start about COBRA and then AfriCOBRA. Before AfriCOBRA, there was COBRA, whereby the artists and others would gather at gallery places, creative minds, to discuss concepts of relevant Black art and aesthetics. This group is recognized as one of the most organized collectives in Black arts movement. However, in 1969, COBRA revised their philosophies and artistic concepts to illustrate their concern for Black liberation and civil rights on an international level, with acknowledgement that name was changed to AfriCOBRA, which stands for African Commune of Bad Relevant Artists. Yes. Centered around ideas of Black pride and empowerment, political theme art and Kool-Aid colors. 1970 was your first major art exhibition at the Studio Museum in Harlem. Art was for the people. It sought to create art that depicted high-profile subjects like the Black Panthers, Angela Davis, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and they wanted to present their strengths. Was able to reject Black stereotypes that included dysfunctional Black families and sometimes refused to show in mainstream museums. Now, with that said, they had a manifesto that was developed by one of your colleagues, which was Jeff Donaldson, and that included 3 categories. And in addition to that, there was art direction that included 6 qualities. This is what I'm thinking what made it so specific and for you to able to continue doing your job. With that said, do you think this is what was the success of your collective? Question?
What was the success?
By having this manifesto and be able to follow these qualities, these 6 qualities, and the 3 categories of the manifesto.
Our goal specifically was to create a new language, to create a Black aesthetic, very different from what other Black artists was doing. We call ourselves, in the beginning, we was COBRA, Coalition of Black Revolutionary Artists. And a lot of artists at this time was not falling away from the word Black, attaching Black to whatever they was doing. There was a lot of people said there was artists who happened to be Black, but we was Black artists, and we was trying to create, our goal was to create something Black that was not around, you know, it was no Black aesthetic, and so we came together to do that. And we formed the philosophy. We met for 2 years before we started exhibiting. We formed a philosophy, we was making art, but we were not exhibiting it at all. And we, all of us agreed to, it was 5 of us from the beginning, I'm backing up now. It was Jeff Donaldson, myself, Gerald, Barbara Jones, and Joe Williams. We were the founding members. And we met for a couple of years, and the next 1 year passed, and we had other people start joining the group. That included Nelson Stevens, Napoleon Jones Henderson, and Carolyn Lawrence, and later Sherman Beck, and very later Omar Lama. And by the time we worked for the whole 2 years, we had what we call sort of Mickey Mouse shows around Chicago. Like the first show was at an upper grade center. Strangely enough, it was named Wadsworth Upper Grade Center. And that was our first exhibit. And it was a conference there with all kinds of civil rights leaders like Jesse Jackson, educators like Barbara Sizemore, Anna Kohlheim. They was well-known educators in Chicago, and all kinds of activists was on the panel, and we exhibited there. We had our exhibit hanging around, and the AACM musical group played music there at the same time. So that was our first exhibit, and we had one at Notre Dame. And I think that's pretty much, we had individuals that showed at the WJ Studios, which was Jay and our studio where we met, where that was our headquarters. So our first exhibit, we invited Ed Spriggs, who was the director of the Studio Museum in Harlem, and Barry Gaither came to meetings, who was at the Afro-American Gallery Center in Boston. So they both invited us to exhibit, and we showed at the Studio Museum first. This was our first exhibit, and we had agreed to not show in any mainstream galleries, and only African American galleries or museums or those was operated by African Americans. So we had, that was our first exhibit, which was a great exhibit. We got a tremendous amount of exposure and publicity. And interesting enough, we attracted the mainstream media that covered the show. Even a magazine in Paris covered it, you know. So we went international all of a sudden in this one show. And the show traveled to Boston, and it traveled to Chicago, back to the Black Expo in Chicago. This was the AfriCOBRA 1. We had shows we named. The first show was AfriCOBRA 1, the second AfriCOBRA 2, and AfriCOBRA 3, and we stopped naming them then, and, you know, that name. We was offered, Ed Spriggs went along with other curators, a lot of curators from the Fogg Museum, different museums all around the country. And he took slides of work from African Americans in America. So, and he took AfriCOBRA. And according to him, when he showed AfriCOBRA, a lot of museums was interested in exhibiting us, including the Modern Museum in Paris. And we turned all of this down. We told them no, we didn't take the thing, and some people criticized us, even later years, that we should have shown in those museums.
Did you ever regret turning that down?
No, because I didn't, because we had a philosophy that we stuck to. You know, if you agree to do something, you're a little wishy-washy if you organize in a group and you do something else that you did not agree to do.
Was there ever any disagreement that you guys should be able to show in other places?
I never heard any pushback.
No.
For the most part, we knew we were here. We were art for the people.
Right.
And our people were around us. And we wanted to make sure that they knew they had artists that would speak to their conditions, but uplift the kind of element that had faced our people, and bring beauty to collaboration. And that is something that we definitely needed. Our leaders were giving us representation, but it was necessary that we thought as artists that we, to illustrate how it can be, how it should be, and empowerment. So that an interest in going elsewhere and taking advantage of faraway places at that time was not of interest. It was sort of in the locale. It was around us. And given Chicago, it might have been on 63rd, it might be on Michigan Avenue, but for the most part, it was the South Side that needed our help and our management.
Now that you guys are going international, at what point do you realize we have a very successful art movement?
The more we were requested to show, and we got together rather dynamic exhibits that were publicized, and we were not only invited, but invited to return So people were watching us build, and our work was like a family growing up together.
Let's talk about Kool-Aid colors. Whose idea was that it was included in the manifesto to include these Kool-Aid colors?
I guess going back to what you started with, your question kind of begs the question as to why should a group of artists, or why should individuals join a group? You know, why should artists, what was the purpose? I mean, was it to lobby for some rights to be included in the mainstream? We basically didn't know what we wanted to do until we had the meetings and got together and started teasing out the principles that we developed and recognized ourselves, and then passed on through, as Wadsworth said, some of the organizations and institutions that hosted the exhibitions, that hosted the work that we put together. The idea of Kool-Aid colors, and that's C-O-O-L-A-D-E, and not the package of
The
red, yellow stuff.
K-O-O-L.
And you asked who came up with that. It was, yeah, we were not just 5 people in the beginning meeting. There were visitors who dropped by the meetings and offered suggestions and comments and criticisms. And someone looked at Wadsworth's, one of his early paintings and said, "Boy, are you painting with Kool-Aid or something?" So it was from that point that, hey, you know, Kool-Aid colors, you know, they reflect that particular time when color was supreme in the way people dressed and in the clothing that suddenly appeared available in you know, green pants or green pants and purple shirt and multicolored dresses and so forth. So that became a key ingredient in this recipe that became AfriCOBRA philosophy, you know, along with the lost and found line and mimesis at midpoint and full field composition.
Okay.
Also, I'd like to add that Robert Page visited with us, a textile designer who, and paper flat pattern designer, who had been at the Art Institute and other, and was also a fellow classmate of some of us. And he was mentioning the fact that the boys on the block, wanting to be cool, called their colors Kool-Aid colors. So we thought that was pretty fly, and that speak for us. So.
And that related to the bright clothing black people were wearing in the 60s. Bob Page related that to that too, you know. So.
Did you feel that it was important that the artwork communicate political issues directly?
Well, we you know, we didn't live in a vacuum. You know, there were things going on. Chicago was a cauldron disparate emotions and feelings about what was going on in various communities, and what could be done to change things. We read the newspapers. We lived within a couple of rounds of bullets of gangs and officers of the law. I was looking for
that word. I agree. Way of saying
for
it.
something really sexy to say.
Boys in blue.
But that was the reality that we developed in. The politics of Chicago are noteworthy, and we were affected by all of the various aspects of that political scene.
Of all the works you've done, were there any particular works that got a kickback about the subject matter or the content?
One thing, everything we do is somewhat controversial in a manner, but it's in beautiful colors, and it tends to soften the blow. Before you know it, you're caught. But that was very important to us. We didn't get pushback. We got more comment, and it was right on time. It was powerful. It was important to be powerful, strong, give some kind of direction, some kind of, we tried not to do the fight. We may portray the solution, not soft, but with a few bruises, and keep getting up. But it was important to uplift and not to rant. I think you will see in a collection of our work that there is a chorus of solutions, and strong, powerful people are portrayed, and we put the beautiful side of them forward.
So to add to that, any of the pushback we got was not from the audience where we exhibited. It was we critiqued each other's work.
Okay.
And that we did get some pushback. Matter of fact, sometimes we had, at least one time, we had a knockdown, drag-out argument.
Amongst yourself.
Amongst
Sure.
ourselves, amongst the group, So I remember for the first exhibit we had at the Studio Museum, I was doing a large piece. It's now in the Miami Museum. And it was a piece of Malcolm X, and it's called Homage to a Giant. And it's 4 images of Malcolm X on it. And there are 3 other images. One is Jesse Jackson, Stokely Carmichael, and Huey Newton is in the middle with a bandolier on. So when I was doing the painting, this was good criticism for me. I had Malcolm laying in the casket, open, dead. So Jeff Donaldson said, "Malcolm isn't dead, close the casket." So I closed it on the painting. And Nelson Stevens came and looked at it, and he said the painting is powerful on each end. The middle is weak. And on the casket, I had R.C. Davis paraphrase the speech he made at Malcolm X's eulogy. He eulogized Malcolm. And I paraphrased it and had it on. And he said, the lettering carries the painted on the bottom, and on each end is powerful, and the middle is weak. So I had been to Breadbasket in Chicago, which Jesse Jackson ran. And I used to shoot a lot of pictures every Saturday morning. And he wore this colorful, sort of dashiki coat on. And I was shooting in black and white and color. So I put this robe on him that I had shot and made it, part of it was transparent where it ran all through the things. And Nelson came back and said, that's great, you know. But this is the kind of criticism we was able to receive. But everybody didn't, well, this is one time we had a blowout criticizing someone's work, you know. And that's the only pushback, I think, that we receive.
One of the things that you have to realize is that the 60s ushered in an age of empowerment for all of those descendants of Africa who had been trounced upon, given second-class treatment, denigrated, attempted to be driven out of existence, gained a sense of power that was reflected in the four ladies who were just here. And that empowerment, you know, just propelled itself through for the last 50 years. And, you know, we've seen in the slides that looped through just what the result of that, part of the result of that is, you know, the number of publications, the massive volume of artwork that is out there, and the rise of some political leaders who were serious. So we are blessed that that period came along at that particular time.
Jay, let's talk about your clothes making. Now, you were raised in a family where your grandfather, if I'm not mistaken, was a tailor?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And your uncle was a haberdasher, correct?
Yes, yes.
And your mother also took you shopping to vintage stores and so forth. As time went on, what was your muse? Where did you get the ideas to create these clothes? Because when I look at your garments, they look very corporate, if you will, you know, very tailored in this tweed, but then they had that one touch. So where did you get these ideas to come forward?
I've always loved classic dress, and that was what Mother taught. And I looked for fabrics that would allow me that. And I've always had some kind of surprise that I might bring. It may be in buttons. It may be the collar, but it's there. You know, you open up the coat and it's in the lining. But it's a gotcha moment that is somewhat fun to me after I've given my expertise to the workmanship, to the silhouette, to the style, to the purpose of the garment. And one must know we were in revolution.
Okay.
And the Black Panthers showed me the way. And so this is for the sisters.
No, it's mine. It's my understanding that the outfits were designed to fit us, meaning people of color. Did you actually use black models or yourself to make them fit in that particular way?
No, I just sew, I cut and sew. I'm a little on the edge. It allows me some surprise of how it falls. So I use mannequins.
Okay.
And she happens to be painted all black, though. But we know the mannequin company didn't have that intention. But it's okay. We have hips, necks, and breasts, and it all hangs tough, so.
Is there one particular piece that you've made that is your favorite?
Is a favorite? No, they're like my children. And my children all have their place in my heart. And that's what it's all about. That is what I bring to AfriCOBRA, is the family. It is our responsibility to be able to share family pride and build that. This is what we felt in the organization of AfriCOBRA. So they're my brothers, though I don't call them brother. They just have their place in all these years. And that's why you trust and do your work right in front of them. Everything is shared. And that's what makes us meld. That's what happens when we exhibit. That's why it looks like a family course.
Okay. Each of you were academically trained in the arts. You've gone on to get your BA or your master's. With that said, did any of the European teachings come forward in your work, or did you push them back and allow your own ideas to come forward and supersede those?
We spent a lot of time, what we call, unteaching ourselves from what we had learned in the European schools. Because most of us, a matter of fact, probably all of us that lived in Chicago, in some way was associated with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. They've gone there at night or whatever. But I graduated from there, and we never learned anything but European art. Actually, when I was going, you didn't learn anything about contemporary American art. The modern art stopped with Picasso when I was going, so, you didn't know anything about Hans Hofmann, any of these people. They didn't never come up, So we spent a lot of time, but some of the influence of what you learn, the craft you learn, had to come through in what we was doing. I mean, there's no way you can divorce yourself from it, because, you had honed this craft through the schools we had gone to. And we all had gone to some types of prestigious schools. Barbara and Jeff had master's degrees from IIT, which is a sort of a little snotty school in Chicago. And Jeff was working on his PhD, and we all had basically bachelor's degrees or something, and we all had formal training. We wasn't just guys jumped up and say, I'm gonna be an artist, we had all had the training.
One thing we did deliberately do is in the unlearning was choosing something that we felt would be significant, that we developed for AfriCOBRA, as opposed to the way that we may have learned, or a process we may have learned. And mine was from the second suits. I have a suit in this exhibit, Brothers Surround and Sis. And as I began to work with leather and suede, all of my seams were sticking out. They all are carved out. They're the lines of the work. And normally we would enclose the seam, and the raw side would be inside. So I make a play on that, and it becomes a decorative moment and a deliberate line.
John Constable.
Say that again?
John Constable. You know who that was? I was a big fan of John Constable. I wanted to just paint landscapes and, you know, the kind of scenes where you could smell the soil and it just, you know, meant life and everything like that. I enrolled in a university and during Roosevelt University in Chicago, which was across the street from the Art Institute. I majored in, I had dreams of becoming an accountant. I was a business student, majoring in business with accounting. And I spent a lot of time in the Art Institute dreaming about John Constable and those English landscapes. But there was a big Gauguin exhibition. And so I went over and I was blown out of the water by the colors and the scenery and the fact that it was in Tahiti, which was a far cry from the brick and stone of the environment down there. And that was a 17-year-old's epiphany.
Oh, okay.
Of, hey, I'm going to go to Tahiti and paint all these beautiful brown women and the flowers and it bled over into midterms and finals where that didn't have anything to do with anything but balance sheets and ledgers and stuff like that. When I woke up in Okinawa as a member of the Air Force, which was not far from Tahiti, I took advantage of a resource that the military did provide as part of the quality of life of us who were in there. They had a very well-resourced arts and crafts center, and I spent a great deal of time, of my spare time, in an unused Quonset hut. Some of you might know what that word means. But anyway, warding off the mosquitoes and watching the geckos and the spiders and looking out for these poisonous snakes. I was able to do quite a bit of work just freelancing, you know, taking advantage of the time. By the time that was all done and I got back to Chicago in 1966, Chicago was not the same. You know, there were the demonstrations, the riots, the sit-ins, and faced with a question posed to me by Jeff Donaldson at Northeastern Illinois University. Would you be interested in joining an artist group? I said, I'm not joining anything else. I just got a divorce from having joined the military. Positive all the way, don't get me wrong, you know, but I just wasn't interested. But I went to meetings, that he talked about, and we got together, and that was AfriCOBRA. Contemporaneously with that, I was taking classes from an instructor at Chicago Community College, Simo Rosofsky, who saw some drawings that I brought in of ballet dancers and some landscapes. He said, "Why are you messing around with this stuff?" And he wasn't being disparaging or anything, but he said, "You got a whole universe of ideas out there. I suggest you look around a lot closer." And I shared a building with Wadsworth and J, and I didn't try to copy any of his work, but during the process of being involved in our laboratory, that transition took place and then there's something looping through called I Am Somebody. That was the result of attending the breadbasket meetings of Jesse Jackson and almost like a mantra at the end of his dialogue, he would shout out, "I am somebody." And the audience would repeat and repeat, and it was a very spiritual moment, and it said a lot about the state of affairs of the generations that have poured through America.
Talk about the incorporation of the letters in the artwork. As you're going through the artwork, you will see details and details of lettering and repeated over and over.
That was part of the philosophy. And one person that emphasized it a lot was Barbara Jones. She was a big fan of cartoons. And this is her.
When you say cartoons, are we talking
this
about
was her influence,
comics?
This was her influence on art, was comics, she said. And even as a grown-up, she said she still read them. But anyway, the lettering that you see in comic books was the lettering that she used a lot. And this was introduced as one of the principles. We had 12 principles, and this was one of the principles, is using words in lettering in the art. So it reads like a billboard, sort of, And
were there ever any hidden messages in the artwork?
Oh, sure.
And who knew about this? Only the
some of it is very visible,
One of the artists.
We've got this one second painting we made. I saw the first painting I made. This one has some words in it here, behind me. This is my painting. And it's all about black women. It's celebrating black women, this painting. And it's petitioning them to wear their hair natural instead of using chemicals in it or going to the beauty parlor, having it straightened, and using the products and all. This is what this painting was all about. And some of the words are not this visible. Some of them you have to look for. There's one in the Miami Museum that I did that was introduced as a second project. And there was a few bad words in it. And and what was interesting, I was in the museum, and the director of the Art Institute had a whole group of people there. And she came over and asked me, was I Wadsworth? And they was looking at the painting and they was reading it. And they said, wow, this is powerful. And they said, one of the graduates of the Institute, she was an older lady, she said, only someone from the Institute could have done this. So anyway, it was the comparison, it was to compare a white person with a black person. And you can choose your subject. So I chose the blues players, because I didn't only think it, I knew that black blues players are superior because they invented the blues. So I have a guitar player in front, a black person playing a guitar with their legs crossed, and I have the Beatles in the background. And the title of the painting is, I'm better than those motherfuckers and they know it. And you have to, you can read it, but it's not, it doesn't just jump out when you first see it. If you're standing 10 feet from it, you would never see it. It just becomes part of the painting. You know.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, this was also a piece that a couple of the members in the organization didn't agree with.
Only two of us ended up with it on the painting, myself and Barbara Jones. Everybody else chickened out. Even Jeff introduced it. He chickened out.
So was this part of one of those times where there was butting of heads?
What?
Was this one of the times when the group was butting heads?
No.
Well,
No.
we,
They just didn't do it. They didn't
Plain
butt
and
heads.
simple.
We just ended up with it on my painting and on Barbara Jones' print.
Okay.
And Jeff was the last one to bring his in. And there was a girl from South Africa in his class at Northwestern. And she was a singer. And her name was
Miata Fambule.
Miata Famule. And he said, Miata Famule is better than all. That's what he put in his instead of putting what he introduced, you know. So they just chicken out, you know.
Just straight out chicken out.
I would like to just say that the reason why I chickened,
Do tell.
because I was ranting about uplift, power, empowerment, you know, glorious kind of, you know, and I just couldn't picture the other MF that I was going to have to portray on that, because that would give him some credence. So I thought it's better that I just move on to positive energy.
I always had problems with lettering. So that was a problem that I didn't want to deal with, you know, because, I mean, the problem is maybe a technical one, you know, where you have the hard edge and the soft, you know, integrating soft forms and hard edges. I needed a lot more practice with. So I concentrated on I am somebody, if you feel comfortable with yourself, and you don't need to tell anybody how you feel.
And his end project he brought in says, I am somebody. That was his answer to that introduction.
We've run out of time, but if you'll indulge me, I would at least like to take 2 questions if we may, and we'll try to keep it short. Does anyone have a question?
There's somebody right down here.
Lady.
I first encountered AfriCOBRA studying with Rick Powell and his wonderful volume, African American Artists of the 20th Century. And I remember seeing Revolutionary Suit, and it changed everything that I thought art was.
Thank you.
So my question or commentary is that as much as politics, black politics, are clearly a part of the project, craft So, and I would imagine that critics who haven't necessarily paid as much attention to the last two, the craft and the choice of medium. But I would love to hear from you all about your commitment to painting, to textile, which we talked about a little bit, to drawing, and also painting.
Thank you. I appreciated your comments. Thank you. The idea of our inviting artists to come join us and bring their craft, in the back of my head, I could just taste the sculptor. There was going to be painters, printmakers, a sculptor perhaps, and we kept inviting them into Sunday gatherings or whatever, and nobody wanted to deal with the Kool-Aid colors for the most part. The medium they're using might be pretty marble, and so I called myself the third dimension of AfriCOBRA. Decided that you're going to go around my pieces and see front and back, and I will express to you, which was good for me to, a challenge for me to make certain I do. But the second part of your question was? Right. It gave me, in a sea of painters and printmakers, image makers, a manner and give a board on which to paint. And it just had a new freedom to it, and certainly a freshness that would catch the eye of the people. So Brothers Surrounding Sis is in this exhibit, and I love the idea of the sister who can count on those dudes, arm in arm, just being there presenting her. And their silhouette is in the sleeves as well. But these are wonderful moments that I arrived at and found that it was a presentable idea to pre-exist with AfriCOBRA members who are doing so much.
One more question?
Could I add to that, Nelson? Could I add to that? Thank you, Nelson, and you're reminding me of that. The glitch that I was in was that I was a suit maker, and it was sort of pricey, but in the AfriCOBRA tradition, since they were doing $10 and $15 prints of their work, offering them to the people, I did, as opposed to the $250 suit, the $110 suit, bullets and all.
And let me just add something else. I mean, since we're in Los Angeles and Nelson brought up the prints, one of our first customers was right here in LA, Brockman Gallery.
Right.
was looking at an invoice not too long ago. I don't remember all the details, but Brockman Gallery. And I understand someone is going to be here
Yeah,
representing
Dale,
them later.
one of the
later
founding
on.
brothers.
And one of the other early customers was Rainbow Sign Gallery, just up in Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of grew in recognition as a result of those prints that we developed and then distributed around the country. So.
And the prints have escalated. Some have been in auctions. They've escalated from the $10, up. They're into the thousands of dollars now, so.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you put your hands together for the members of AfriCOBRA?
Thank you very much.
Okay, we are going to take a break for lunch. We're going to come back. The program will start again at 1:10 with a conversation between Darren Walker and Ava DuVernay. 2:10. What did I say? 2:10. So you get an hour and a half. 2:10. Thank you.